about, if I ever have a question about technology transfer or licensing or spinouts or anything like that, the first person I call and the last person I call is Kathy Koo. And Kathy answers the phone. She answers my email. She is not only the most knowledgeable person in this field on the planet, but she is also the nicest and most helpful person on this planet, and especially in this field. So after a glorious career at Stanford University, she's now the head of expert on licensing at Wilson Sonsini, Goodrich and Rosati, the premier law firm sponsoring high-tech spinouts and startup companies on the planet. An impressive place. And they snatched her up when she retired from Stanford. Now she's doing this for Wilson Sonsini. So I won't say any more other than please join me with an ecstatic welcome of Kathy Koo.
This is so fun, and I'm so embarrassed to be on this big screen in front of you. Thank you for such a warm welcome. I'm very honored to be here, to be this part of this important inaugural program, and I hear the energy has been just amazing. I really wanted to be here with you in person, but I had a trip planned a long time ago, so I can't be. But I wanted to be here to meet you and talk to you and just see what's going on with you. So I do hope that I can join you next year. As Dan had said, I've devoted my career to various aspects of technology transfer for my whole life. I was lucky to be at the right place at the right time. I started at Stanford just when the Bayh-Dole law was passed. Stanford was one of the early universities who had already started a technology transfer operation in 1970. So by 1980, when I started, Stanford had a small office, but we had a tech transfer system in place. And this gave us a little bit of a head start. We had a patent policy whereby the university owned inventions, and we had a royalty sharing policy whereby we shared net royalties with inventors, 1/3 to the inventor, 1/3 to the department, and 1/3 to the university. Now, the university is a central university, but we are a very school-based university. And so several years later, after that first royalty sharing policy was passed, they changed that last third to go to the school. Instead of the university getting a share, the School of Medicine or the School of Engineering would get their share. And the whole point there was to let the royalties go to the academic unit that was closest to where that innovation happened. Stanford was lucky too to have fundamental patents in biotech. The gene splicing patents were the basis of the biotech industry. Again, I was very lucky to be assigned that invention to handle. I mean, I really remember my first assignment was to call 70 companies to tell them they needed to pay $10,000. We didn't even have an invoicing system at the time. And so I had to cold call all these big companies. It was the scariest thing I'd ever done. But right now it was a great experience because I can cold call anyone. Anyway, at the end of the day, we licensed these Cohen-Boyer patents to 440 companies and brought in about $255 million total. Basically, this license put Stanford on the map. Eventually, I became director of the Office of Technology Licensing. We call it OTL. And that was in 1991. The previous director had been there 20 years. So I stayed 27 years. So again, OTL has just had only 3 directors in all these years. And it's a very stable organization, which I will talk about later. During my tenure, we emphasized several things. One of the most important things is we wanted to always do what was best for the technology. Do what is best to get it out into industry. We also wanted to work very closely and work well with our inventors. We wanted to keep them informed and get their opinion, but we didn't want to let them dictate what we did. Number 3, we wanted to be risk-taking and business friendly. We always thought of ourselves as business people, rather than legal people. And in general, we did not hire lawyers to be in the office. Number 4, we believe that the agreement represented the spirit of the relationship, a long-term relationship. It was going to be at least a 20-year relationship. I always believe that if you have a good relationship, it almost doesn't matter what the contract says, you can work out things. But if you have a bad relationship, it almost doesn't matter what the contract says because you can't make a bad relationship into a good one with a contract. 5th, I believe we should keep things simple and give people the authority to use their best judgment. We tried to be creative. We had very few rules. So we tried to be creative so that we could meet the needs of the company when they came up with their particular scenario. I believed in hiring good people and letting them do their job. I think it's very important to minimize bureaucracy, try to eliminate it when possible, and try to eliminate too many levels of approval. At OTL, the licensing associates did the deal. They were working with the licensee, and then I signed them. So ultimately, a deal could be done in one day if all the parties wanted that to happen. Lastly, and I think very importantly, I believed in planting as many seeds as possible. These are licensing seeds. From my perspective, the license is the most concrete evidence that the university has transferred the technology to industry, and industry then needs to take it over. OTL is now 52 years old. The age of an office really matters. The Stanford Technology Licensing Office grew organically and grew within an increasingly entrepreneurial ecosystem that was developing in Silicon Valley at around that same time. Venture capital had only begun in the 1960s and 70s in Silicon Valley. So there were companies like Cisco, Sun Microsystems, Silicon Graphics. These companies were all started by Stanford faculty who were able to spin out their company from Stanford because the venture capital community grew at the same time. Once biotech happened, Stanford was again at the forefront of biotech patenting and licensing. Stanford faculty have always been entrepreneurial from its earliest days, and it continues to attract entrepreneurial faculty and students into the region. Our provost, Frederick Terman, is often called the father of Silicon Valley. He encouraged Bill Hewlett and Dave Packard to form Hewlett-Packard, and he encouraged others to start companies. During my tenure at Stanford, the academic leadership always supported our office, and I think that was very essential to Stanford's success. Some universities have changing leadership, and then there's a changing vision, and that can be very hard on the tech transfer office. So as I mentioned earlier, OTL was very stable, and my bosses always said tech transfer wasn't about the money. Importantly, I also believed in being a good citizen, a good university citizen. So we wanted to collaborate well, and I think we did, with other parts of the university. And I emphasize again, no one ever pressured our office to make money. In fact, I often have said that we suffered and benefited from benign neglect. We did not run our agreements through the legal office. I had signature authority, and we had great autonomy to do what we thought was right. We collectively had a vision for tech transfer, that it should be for the public benefit, and that we should do what was best for transferring that technology from the university to industry in the most effective way we could. And we use the word effective rather than efficient because we want to do it right. The 9 points to consider in licensing university technology is a document that was an outgrowth of a relatively small meeting of about 12 universities. We convened it at Stanford because we wanted the academic leadership, the deans of research, the deans who were in charge of tech transfer, and we wanted the tech transfer directors to be all in the same room at the same time so we could discuss important issues together. This meeting was actually the first time the academic leadership and the tech transfer directors from several universities were all in the same room as a group. The result of the meeting was the 9 points. And again, I want to say that a small group can make a big difference. I want the tech transfer community to know that I know tech transfer is really hard. There is much expected of us, and there are many, many parts of it that are not in our control. And I hope this meeting helps stakeholders understand the complexity of the whole process. So what's not in our control? First, we all need to have researchers who do high quality research and who are interested in commercialization. We have to have researchers who invent things and who are willing to invest the time and effort to talk to us and perhaps get involved in filing and perhaps getting involved in commercialization. In the tech transfer office, we know that most of the inventions are very early stage, and it is actually very hard to evaluate them. Most importantly, we need inventors who are not afraid to talk to the office. I want to tell you one story. One inventor of what turned out to be a lucrative patent told me that he and his co-inventors were really afraid to talk to OTL. They had to debate, was their invention good enough to disclose to the university? And so they weren't sure whether they should talk to us. Thank goodness they did. I was honestly shocked that there was any hesitation to contact our office. So my note to tech transfer offices is do not make yourself too scary. And even with good inventions, the inventions have to be of commercial interest to companies. And honestly, we have to have many of these kinds of commercially interesting inventions. Quality and quantity are important. Then we have to have enough of a budget to file patents, and these are expensive. This is probably the biggest challenge of most offices. How should we spend that limited budget that we have? Are we filing too much? Are we filing too little? And honestly, it's very hard to tell sometimes. Very, very importantly, we need to have companies who are willing to take the risk in early stage inventions and be willing to license them. Tech transfer offices are going to throw the ball, but someone has to catch it on the other side. So I'm going to digress slightly to make sure the broader community understands one thing. There's a very, very big difference between the receptivity of licensing for early stage technologies between the physical science companies and the life sciences companies. Life sciences companies understand risk, and they understand long development times, and they understand early stage inventions, particularly in the therapeutic and diagnostic spaces. They are much more likely to take university licenses. And in the US, most universities have made more of the money in life sciences inventions. Physical science companies, like IT and semiconductors, they often have thousands of patents in their products, as one Intel executive once told me about their computer. This group of companies are not very interested in licensing early stage university inventions. They'd rather us go away. So this is the fact that if a university is strong in physical science research, it's going to be often harder to license those kinds of patents. I will say that many things may change as industry starts investing in long-term climate and energy solutions. And I hope there will be more interest in licensing physical science technologies as these venture capital and these startups start investing in these areas. So back to throwing and catching the ball. Just because the university throws the ball, it's not a given that anyone will catch it. Most companies want to have products that they can sell right away. And what a tech transfer office is asking the company to do is take a risk, have a long-term mindset to invest dollars, time, and resources in an early stage invention that is unproven, but could be revolutionary. That's really a hard ask. So my classic story I've told many times, is that two kids invented an internet search engine while they're working on a library project. We marketed to all the companies that were doing search and many other companies too. Nobody was seriously interested. These two kids who had no experience in business at all, they were very unhappy that no one recognized the value of their invention. One of them thought it was worth $1 million, which of course was jaw-dropping to us at the time. But the only offer, the best offer, was a $200,000 offer, and it wasn't really a serious one. So what should we do with this technology? Should we have licensed it to two kids who didn't know anything? Well, honestly, we didn't have a choice. So we decided to give them a chance. We didn't even know how to price this license. At the time, no one was making money on search, and the three search engines that existed hadn't even figured out a decent business model. So we licensed Larry Page and Sergey Brin, who started Google. And of course, they changed the world. I have to say, honestly, that we didn't know they would be successful. I'm just proud that we gave them a chance. In fact, to be totally honest, in my 27 years at Stanford, I think we haven't been able to predict which inventions would be successful, which is why I believe in just licensing as many technologies as possible. The marketplace will decide which ones are the winners. So when there is a potential licensee, how do you know whether to grant an exclusive license or a non-exclusive license? I feel like it really depends on the stage of the invention and what is needed to bring it to fruition. And so I'll give a few examples. The gene splicing patent was a fundamental patent that many companies could use, and they knew how to use it based on the publication. One company, Genentech, which was a startup at the time, wanted an exclusive license. One of the founders told me years later that they thought Stanford would have made much more money if we had granted Genentech an exclusive license. So what do you think would have happened to biotech if we granted Genentech an exclusive license? What we knew at Stanford was that this technology was broadly applicable and that many companies could use it, and that we wanted to license it non-exclusively to let all the companies be able to use it. So we licensed it for a modest 0.5% royalty on end products. In contrast, we had a fundamental patent on a method of making a monoclonal antibody. In the early years, all the companies into antibodies were using a whole different method. Centocor, which was a biotech company, not in California, in Philadelphia, they liked our method and they wanted an exclusive license. So we gave them an exclusive license because we needed a company to champion our method. Ultimately, Centocor was bought by J&J. They made the technology work. And so J&J made most of their antibody products using our method, and Stanford did very well on that license. My last story was a student and a faculty came to us with an invention disclosure, and we decided it wasn't patentable, so we said we're not going to file on it. A year later, that student came back and said he wanted to start a company. So we managed to find something to file on, and we gave the company an exclusive license at honestly a very reasonable financial terms because we had dropped it. And so the startup Tableau was founded. Tableau has become one of the world's leading analytics platform and very successful. So universities have realized that startups are the most likely outlet for many early stage technologies because the researchers have the passion and the vision for their technology. Startups will generally require an exclusive license if the company is based on that particular technology. But the exclusive license is not enough to make a company successful. The ecosystem has to be there to support startups. We need venture capital. We need service providers, lawyers, accountants, consultants. You need entrepreneurs at all levels. You need entrepreneurs who want to start the company, but you need experienced entrepreneurs who can help the company grow. And you need the ecosystem to provide support and encouragement. Many regions have incubators, mentors, networking opportunities, etc. More and more, the communities are looking to tech transfer to help create that entrepreneurial ecosystem. And that's hard because tech transfer can't do everything. I am now at Wilson Sonsini, a law firm that helps startups start and grow. I'm now on the other side, and I have the opportunity to work with many universities. The universities that are easy to work with are a pleasure. They understand the needs of a fledgling company, and they're willing to be flexible and reasonable. For those universities, it's not all about the money, but it's trying to help that company succeed. Especially in less entrepreneurial ecosystems, universities have to do a lot more to help the companies succeed. And the easiest way to do that from a university tech transfer perspective is to understand the challenges of a startup. I think I've come to understand in a much more profound way that if a university wants to help a startup, the easiest way to do that is to make the license very investment friendly and to have financial terms that allow the company to make a profit. Sometimes that does mean the university has to make less, take less. I've also come to realize that the license agreement is just the beginning of a very long path for most companies as they try to develop the product, raise money, partner with bigger companies, and grow the business. I've also realized that there are many inventors who are entrepreneurs who are afraid of the tech transfer office because they don't know what to expect. I spend a lot of my time just telling entrepreneurs what a license might look like or what the university purpose of tech transfer is. So again, I say to the university community, be as open and welcoming and transparent as possible. So how can we all accomplish these things we want to do for our university and our ecosystem? By working together. Many of you know about AUTUM, which is the Professional Society of University Technology Transfer People. My first meeting at this professional society was in 1980, when there were about 70 people at the meeting. Now, pre-COVID, an annual AUTUM meeting has about 2,000 people from all over the world learning from each other. Just 2 weeks ago, I attended a much smaller AUTUM leadership conference, which had about 100 people, mostly tech transfer directors. And we participated in a very trusted, very open conversation about many topics. Interestingly enough, the topics were very similar to the ones we're discussing today. The expanding role of technology transfer, best practices for de-risking research results, engaging scientists in innovation, and metrics. Everyone is facing these issues and questions. I wanted to tell you about some other groups in the US. In the US, there are smaller groups that meet regularly, regional groups. So there's Ivy Tech, which is a small group of Ivy League universities, and they added a few like Stanford and MIT. And these directors meet yearly. It's also a very trusted small group of honest conversation. I'm part of a group of tech transfer directors from public universities in the middle of America. And the middle of America is considered much less entrepreneurial. So this is a very small group, about 7 people. And so we freely share with these colleagues our problems, our challenges, and our best practices. There's another small group that I'm part of that just met actually this morning, led by Columbia University. We're trying to develop an actual agreement with language that can be used as a template for life science venture-funded startup licenses. We hope to share this template license agreement with the broader community in December. We're very excited about this effort. So I'm talking to you about all these meetings, big and small, because I think it's essential in our profession and for our own growth to share, share, and share and learn from each other. So what does success look like from my perspective? I think it's really ever evolving, and it shouldn't be one metric at all. If there's one metric I would choose, it would be how many licenses, actual transfers that we have done. But most importantly, we always have to be trying to improve. We need to get more researchers interested in innovation and commercialization. We need to get more disclosures so we have a critical mass to work with. We need to get more licenses, more startups who become big. And ultimately, we want more products on the marketplace, which came from university licenses. More than ever, we all need to help meet society's challenge in health, energy, and climate by moving university research results into companies. And we can do it if everyone works together to contribute to the whole. The reason this meeting is so important is that you have so many of the stakeholders here today. The more the stakeholders understand the challenges, the more the possibility of finding good solutions, of figuring it out at the local level. You can figure out the bottlenecks and the quick wins. There will always be harder challenges to work on in the long term, and it takes all of you working together to meet those challenges. Creating an entrepreneurial ecosystem takes time. As my good friend Lita Nelson from MIT has often said, it took Cambridge 50 to 60 years to become what Cambridge is today. And that is the same with Silicon Valley. These ecosystems don't happen overnight. Everything happens one step at a time. Again, you have the right people here today, and together you can make a change. You can make a difference. Minyak Gakur Lakela.
Thank you, Kathy. If that didn't blow my expectations away, I don't know what ever would. So many things that we've been just grappling with all day long, you shared your wisdom and guidance about, and we're very, very grateful for that. We have a little bit of time for questions, and we have roving mics on both aisles. So who would like to ask the first question? Yeah, Michal wants to make a comment.
You know, Kathy, I can improve on what you said. And you have taught us everything, as Dan said, we grappled with all day. I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for having said what you've said today. Okay, you've given us permission to keep going. You've given us permission to be brave and to, you know, to do what's right. Okay, so I'm just going to look at that transcript and I'm going to share it. I just want to thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome. And I want to be with you next year.
Okay, you're accepted. There was a question over here. Here comes the mic.
Kathy, hi, this is Peter Smith, Commercial Director in the Tyndall National Institute. Maybe it's late in the day for a fairly serious question, but one of the things that interests me about what you've said is the lack of pressure that there might have been in terms of the early days to make money out of the transactions. One of the things that I find there are jurisdictional differences perhaps in how we all have to do things, and the strain that there might be when there's public money involved in making sure that there's a reasonable return, right? So how do you deal with that? How do you make sure that the stakeholders who fund everything and underpin everything that we do see the return in the way that most benefits the ecosystem, with many, many startups that are very, very successful? How do you do that?
One of the things that I think is really important is to explain to stakeholders this long time lag. I often would say that we could close down OTL today and still bring in money, because the money that's coming in, the royalty revenue, people like to measure us by royalty revenue. Well, it doesn't reflect what we're doing today, because the royalties were based on agreements done years ago. So as you know, in tech transfer, you get the disclosure, you file a patent, it takes years for the patent to issue, it takes years for a license to be consummated and for the company to develop product. So if you can manage expectations, I used to say manage their expectations, that if I do a license today, it's going to be probably 10 years before you see a return. If the leadership can understand that, or the government who is funding you, if they can really understand that in a profound way, I think it would help. So again, they need to start. If they don't start investing today, they're not going to see anything in 10 years. But if they start investing today, they will see something in the future. And again, it's very unpredictable. The university statistics is much worse than venture capital. Venture capital looks at lots of deals and they pick the best ones. The university has to pick among lots and lots of early stage technologies. We don't know if they're going to be winners or not. And I dare challenge anyone who thinks they can pick the winners.
Hi, Kathy. Leonard Hobbs here from Trinity College Dublin. There's a criticism often of ourselves here in this part of the world, I mean Europe, that we're very good at starting companies, we're not very good at scaling companies. And yet the US is very good at both. So what's your perspective on that in terms of what's different between the two geographies? And is there a role for the tech transfer offices to help companies scale once they've spun them out?
Well, one of the things that I've heard most often is that the scaling, one of the big challenges is experienced entrepreneurs in the region. That, you know, it's one thing to be a first-time entrepreneur, you have the passion and all that. But as the company grows, sometimes the responsibilities get a little bit too big for that person and they need to bring in experienced people. But in certain ecosystems where it's not that entrepreneurial, there are not that many experienced entrepreneurs. So I think that's the biggest challenge. We've heard that as the biggest issue in the Midwestern universities in America. I think this is a big challenge for many ecosystems. One of the things that's been going on in the US, and I don't know how successful it is, but they're trying to come up with a database of people who are more experienced, who would be willing to help mentor or even move to help a company grow. They're the experienced folks. There's a database of names where they could help the startup grow. And I think it's a people deficit at that point. And if you can really hone in and find a few people who would help, that would be really useful. And of course, it's the next staging thing. If the venture capital is funding the startup, at some point they want to exit. And so in some ways, and I think the tech is a lot to ask of tech transfer to help them find partners. But I think if you could come up with resources where you could point them to resources, I think that might help.
Thank you. Next question. Michael.
Hi, Kathy. It's Michael Dalashow, spun out CCAM Therapeutics. I wanted to ask, what role did Stanford play post-spin out to help the startup? So what were the services, or what did you deliver post the spin out event?
So I will tell you, I always feel terrible talking about Stanford because we're in a very unique ecosystem. Stanford did not have to do anything to help startups. I mean, basically, it was a very entrepreneurial ecosystem. MIT and Stanford are really in the rare position where we hadn't had to do very much. So during my tenure, basically, we gave them license and we said, go forward, you figure it out. The reason it works at Stanford is that there's so many people who had done it. I mean, and it grew over time, of course. But if there's a graduate student who wants to start a company, they can find a faculty member who's done it and they can just go talk to them. If there's a first-time entrepreneur faculty who wants to like figure out how someone else did it, there are other faculty people who they can talk to. So there's a very robust network here. And so it's very informal and everyone is quite open to help each other, just introduce you to different people, talk to you about how it worked, talk to you about angel financing and et cetera, et cetera. So the network here is amazing.
So I'm from the Midwest of Ohio. So what are you recommending to that cohort of states that would be similar to, I guess, what we are here in Ireland?
Well, so we've been saying, come up with a list of people that can help. Many of them are on the early stages. They want to have proof of concept funds. They want to have accelerators, et cetera. And then they will maybe use alumni as a database of people who they might tap into.
That's great. We actually heard more about alumni today. A great resource idea. Yes.
Hi, Paul Dillon from the University of Limerick. We had an interesting debate this morning around this whole debate of assignment or licensing. I'm familiar with the Bayh-Dole Act, but I know we have kind of a pseudo Bayh-Dole Act here in the guise of the National IP Protocol in Ireland, and it's been something of a scene setter in Europe. But I'd be interested in your view, setting aside Bayh-Dole, around the argument that, oh, we must assign the IP in so that the company is investable. Because I think this debate seems to go around in circles, but I think there's a whole US culture that maybe we can learn from.
In the US, we don't assign the license. We don't assign the IP to a company. Under Bayh-Dole, you're not allowed to. And then the other thing is, even if Bayh-Dole went away, let's just say the law gets disbanded, I think all the universities would keep their patent policy. They would still say the university owns the IP. And so now that the Bayh-Dole concepts have been ingrained in universities, it almost doesn't matter. I don't think the universities would assign the IP.
Kathy, is that true also if the startup that licensed it initially is going to be bought by a big company, or does it not change?
They can assign the license, but not the ownership of the patent.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Okay, I have one more question.
Okay.
And maybe this is not in your purview to answer, but what, if any, is sort of the standard practice for, we're not talking about royalties, we're talking about equity. When a company spins out of a university, in your experience, what kind of equity share is common for the university to retain simply for providing, whatever resources, been employing the inventors or having them as students?
Well, in a typical university license now to a startup, most universities will want equity, but it's as partial consideration. The theory is that the company can't pay much in cash. The cash up front is going to be modest. And so you sort of make it up with equity. So in the US, you typically see something like 3 to 5%, non-dilutable up to a certain amount in fundraise. And the fundraise is often, let's say, 2 million, 5 million, 10 million. It depends on the company and what their business plan looks like. Now, these last few years, financing has been relatively lucrative. And so the universities have been ratcheting up the percentage or the anti-dilution amounts. But I think with the market changing back, I think there's going to be, a readjustment back to, 3 to 5% up to perhaps the first significant round of financing.
Great. Thank you. Yes, Michael?
Sorry, Kathy. Then if you're taking 3 to 5%, then what about the royalty and sub-licensing percentages?
All of it stays the same. Okay, so a typical university license is equity, earned royalties, sub-licensing percentage, and sometimes milestone payments, annual payments. All the other financials are a typical license.
Thank you. Please join me in thanking Kathy Koo for an amazing keynote.
Thank you.
I will take you out for an Irish beer when I get back to Palo Alto.
Okay.
Thanks so
Bye-bye.
much, Kathy. Have a good day.
You too.
Peter, take it from here.
Thanks, Dan. So folks, I know this is, you're tired. It's been a long day, longer than a normal conference. We did push you today, okay? We were ambitious in terms of our schedule and we are slightly behind, but bear with us. We just have our legacy panel, but before the legacy panel kicks off, just once again, deviating slightly from the schedule, I'd like to invite Adam Griffiths, who is a partner and the head of Taylor Wessing Ireland, just to say a couple of words. Adam.
Thanks, Peter. I'm a lawyer, so the proverbial clay pigeon or the person that somebody wanted to skydive into the ground without a parachute. So I know I've got a limited amount of sympathy in the group. Feel about as welcome as a banker in 2008, to be honest. So long story short, when Peter and Liam and Mehul explained the premise of the summit to me, I was sort of scrambling, trying to get the checkbook out quick enough, because Taylor Wessing as a firm globally, we've got 29 offices, 1,000 lawyers, deep tech and life sciences